Hello, YouTube. I recently noticed that people have been watching an old video of mine where I was exploring my complicated feelings about the Canadian cultural, sometimes political YouTuber, JJ McCullough. I've struggled with exactly what I want to talk about on this channel. I started this channel exclusively as someone who wanted to promote his own music, and in order to do that, build a sort of musical community by talking to other musicians, doing album reviews. But, once I got hooked about talking about my feelings on camera, I thought, why not experiment with trying to see if I can reach out to other communities? And I started speaking out to all kinds of audiences. These days, I do a combination mostly of talking about music and talking about my favorite children's book series. But with more attention going back to the JJ McCullough video, I thought, okay, it might be fun to occasionally put out more of a, not necessarily political, but analysis of a commentator on YouTube. And that's what I'm going to get in today. So much has been said about the mysterious thing called the YouTube algorithm. I've certainly had the experience where you look up one Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro video just out of curiosity, and suddenly YouTube decides, oh, you must love right-wing content. Let's bombard you with it. Well, recently, the YouTube algorithm did something similar, but a bit more niche to me. A few months ago, I was exposed to a YouTube channel called Upon Friar Review, and it is hosted by two Catholic friars, Father Patrick Tuttle and Father Casey Cole. And this was amazing for me because I didn't think friars were still a thing. The only friar I knew was Friar Tuck. And well, I loved Robin Hood as a kid, so I thought, yeah, I'll watch some modern day friars. And I started occasionally watching their videos because, well, the premises of the videos looked interesting. It was these guys in the frock reacting, usually in a good-humored way, about the way religion was depicted in media. They'd watch, things like SNL sketches or things from silly movies, like about Brendan Fraser making a deal with the devil, and they'd mostly just laugh at it, and then they'd explain what the true Catholic perspective was on those topics. And they seemed so likable. So even though I might disagree with them on some sort of distant philosophical topics like the existence on God, I was very happy to hear the warm words of these men every week or so. But then once YouTube noticed I had been clicking on these guys, the algorithm unsurprisingly decided that meant I had a broader interest in Catholic content. And the channels I suggested were, let's say, less warm-hearted. It recommended me this guy named Father Mike, who had a similar friendly demeanor to the friars, but his videos were much more serious, and they seemed to, get much quicker to the conservative elements of the Catholic teaching. He had a video about how not going to church was a dun-dun-dun mortal sin. I guess this shows that I'm not a Catholic, because I would have thought only the serious stuff like, murder and rape and whatnot would be mortal sins, not going to church. I think that's a you do you kind of thing. There was another one about how Judas is probably in hell, which as a non-believer who thinks critically about religion doesn't make sense to me, because I thought the whole premise of the Jesus story was Jesus needed Judas to betray him. Judas took on this darkness in his soul to serve a higher function. If Jesus forgives, surely Judas would be at the top of the list of people he forgives. But whatever. Anyway, after Father Mike, I got referred to a video by someone named Noel Mering talking about the Catholic response to wokeness. And it was basically this Catholic woman repeating Jordan Peterson style talking points. Next, I got Pints with Aquinas, which has this Catholic guy interviewing other Catholics and sort of reaffirming the most right-wing elements of Catholic teaching, anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage, not believing that trans people exist. I'm not actually sure how much that is in Catholic thought, but that was certainly on this channel. And then the most recent one I saw, I didn't even click on it because I decided it would be too upsetting and not of intellectual interest to me, was called God and Heaven Are Real, 5 Major Sources of Evidence by Father Mark Goring. Now, maybe a lot of you don't get where I'm coming from here. A lot of you are probably thinking, well, yeah, that's what Catholics think. They believe in God, they believe in heaven, they're not down with same-sex marriage. But I suppose the reason I felt this kind of betrayal by being reminded of Catholic conservatism is that I have a slightly different relationship to religious authorities. You see, I'm Jewish. I'm an atheist, but I'm at least of Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. I'm descended from, the people of the shtetls of Eastern Europe. And though a lot of people are surprised by this when they're outside of Judaism, just because they haven't thought about it very much, being both atheist and Jewish is a very common identity in the modern world. And even beyond those Jews who explicitly identify as atheists, there's a long and nuanced spectrum of Judaism and atheism, agnosticism existing side by side. So while, yes, there are Jews like Ben Shapiro who insist that Judaism is first and foremost a religion and not an ethnic identity, and that's certainly the perspective you'll hear if you go into a Hasidic community, for the most part, the Jews who run into your life are at least somewhere on the atheist agnostic spectrum. And this includes Jews who are members of synagogues and even Jews who are faith leaders. I've heard multiple anecdotes about people's rabbis openly saying, yeah, I'm atheist, but it's important for me to be a rabbi anyway. So as an atheist, when I run into a rabbi, I don't generally feel uncomfortable. The rabbis who I've run into in my life seem less like messengers of the truth and more like guardians of a philosophical tradition. Their goal doesn't seem to be profess the rightness of the Jewish way, rather than to say, well, here's the history lesson of how our people have dealt with this issue, and here's how we can continue to practice those traditions today. So I guess all of this is to say, and this is not anyone's fault, but I feel like there's this mind game played when friars leave their more closed world of devout Catholicism and enter the public community that is YouTube. Because the pluralist in me, the me that's used to these non-dogmatic rabbis, thinks, cool, more people who engage in religious philosophy and are able to tell me about the cultural tradition of their people. People talking about religious jokes and explaining how those jokes make sense and how they don't. These seem like exactly the kind of people who fascinate me in the way that certain rabbis do. And if you watch the right videos from Upon Friar Review channel and you somehow don't stumble upon the more conservative one, you can be left with this perspective. They have plenty of videos that aren't very serious at all and are just lighthearted enjoyment. You get to enjoy these men in these old-fashioned outfits engaging with the modern world and being very good at it. And sometimes they even have videos that are quite serious, quite religiously serious, but still likable from a multicultural perspective. One that really struck me was a video they did analyzing an episode of Community. The TLDR of that video is that Community did a holiday episode in which all the characters have a different religion, but the only one who's really devout about their religion is Shirley. And because she's devout, she tries to convert everyone and speak down to them and enforce them to participate in an emphatically Christian holiday ceremony. And the friars pleasantly surprised me. I learned from them that proselytizing is not encouraged within Catholicism, and that they generally prefer an approach of genuine interfaith dialogue. They want to learn from other faiths to get what Father Patrick called that spiritual fruit. And in this videos and others, they insist their spiritual truths can be gained from listening to other religious perspectives. Sure, they may believe that Catholicism is the most complete or most direct way, but they understand that other people making good faith attempts to engage with morality and truth might pick up on some things that the humans in the Catholic Church have not. And in this video, they particularly noted that Jews never stopped, from a biblical perspective, being the chosen people. So for Shirley to be as dismissive of the Jewish character, Annie in particular, was very wrong, not just from a humanistic, but also from a Catholic perspective. Yet, in the friars' other videos, they seem to go in the complete opposite direction. The two videos of theirs that really upset me were ones they did on the movie The Last Temptation of Christ and one they did on a stand-up special by George Carlin. So The Last Temptation of Christ comes from a novel by the iconic Greek writer Nikos Kazantzakis, and it was adapted into a film in 1998 by the Taxi Driver duo of screenwriter Paul Schrader and director Martin Scorsese. The premise of the film is, what if the story of Jesus Christ was basically the same as in the Bible, except Jesus had the consciousness of a mortal rather than of God? And in their video, the friars called this movie blasphemy. and basically denounce all of its departures from doctrinaire Catholic thought. Blasphemy. You know how I said I didn't realize there were friars after medieval times? Well, frankly, it's even weirder to hear a word like blasphemy being used, post Galileo and the Inquisition, especially when it comes from the mouth of someone who generally feels like a young, hip, progressive friar, like Father Casey. He feels like someone who wants to love and tolerate people. What's he doing using such an aggressively authoritarian, anti-pluralistic word as blasphemy? The Friar's message in this video goes against what they said in their video on Community. The Last Temptation of Christ is not some irreverent Family Guy-esque mockery of Jesus. I could understand if they were offended by that depiction. But no, the Last Temptation of Christ is a non-Catholic attempt to get at that spiritual fruit. It asks the question, how would this story change if Jesus did not have a divine mind? Which version is more influential? The idea of someone trying to be divine but being human, or actually this perfect human being sent down? I think it creates the grounds for a thoughtful conversation. And in a way, the friars have that conversation, yet they have the conversation not from a perspective of this film has a different view from us, but this view has a different view from us, and that is bad. It is blasphemy. And similarly, in their video on George Carlin, the friars did not act like they were respectfully engaging with a different spiritual perspective, but acted outright horrified by the fact that George Carlin was a passionate atheist. Towards the end of the video, when they finally show some sympathy with him, Father Patrick says, this man must have been terribly hurt in order to think this way. He might have been, but not necessarily. Plenty of people can be atheist and very critical of Catholicism just because that is a worldview that makes sense to us. And the horror of the friars of their videos, it just felt absolutely inconsistent with the lightheartedness of their others. So one silly example is that George Carlin curses a lot, and the friars not only bleep out the curses, but they apologize in advance for George Carlin's language. Like, I'm sorry, how can you be spiritually in touch with the tortured masses of the world, yet act like a dirty word is some exceptional, horrifying thing that only terrible people do? No, I assure you that the vast majority of people in the world, especially those frustrated with their plights, swear an awful lot. But in the Carlin video, the friars engage with George Carlin's points in what is an incredibly dissatisfying way that doesn't feel at all consistent with the intellectuals that they supposedly are, people who spend lots of their time reading deeply philosophical texts about church doctrine. So one of the points George Carlin raises in his stand-up special is all the financial corruption that is made in the name of religion. And the friars act like this is a ridiculous point and explain that, no, churches need money to function. Well, yes, churches need money to function. Churches are important to people. Churches should exist for those people. Churches should get money for those people. But you can also acknowledge that televangelists exist. It's not that hard to have both. I think the one that really upset me was when George Carlin raises the issue of heaven and hell. And they say, well, actions have to have consequences. Father Casey has another video on the concept of hell, and he kind of wavers. On the one hand, he emphasizes that the Catholic teaching of hell is separation from God. So it's not about God throwing you into Satan's fires. But he doesn't go so far as to say, well, that concept of hell, of fire and torture, it largely comes from the speculation of people like Dante. It's not in the church at all. No, he tries to have it both ways. And I think this idea of hell is really what pushes me towards the new atheist camp. Otherwise, I would not be a militant atheist at all. I have plenty of disagreements with new atheists. But the fact that there are children in the world being raised to think, if you doubt this religion, or if you're gay or whatever, then you will be subject to cruel and unusual punishment for eternity. Like, yeah, I agree with the friar's argument. Actions have consequences. If you show up at a building rip-roaring drunk, you should be kicked out of that building until you're sober and maybe made to watch out for your relationship with alcohol. I do not believe cruel and unusual punishment should be a punishment for anything. So what am I getting at with this video? I guess, one thing is that the YouTube algorithm can introduce you to some interesting people who can seem like you and then suddenly don't. And also, as I was saying there, I'm starting to reconsider whether there is value in being a militant atheist. So for years, I have shied away from militant atheism. I guess it's because I've had the privilege of growing up in a multicultural liberal place where everyone is either atheist or practices religion in a way that does not come with that right-wing baggage you hear from the evangelical pockets in America. I might disagree with some of my friends on whether there is a God, but those friends still agree on all the important things, that gay and trans people should have the same rights as straight and cis people, that abortion should not be criminalized, etc. So living in my world, yelling about how God doesn't exist just feels snobby and obnoxious because it serves no purpose other than making me feel good about my intellectual position. There's no reason for me to complain about how stupid these religious people are because, frankly, they're not stupid. They just have one spiritual belief that's important to them that isn't important to me. And on top of that, I hear people like Sam Harris or an older Christopher Hitchens basically arguing that certain religions are worse than others, that the benevolent West should, do military interventions in religious parts of the world. And just, look at the news, look at the Iraq war, look at the war in Afghanistan. So many situations, we can't justify that horrible imperialist thinking. So for that reason, I felt alienated from new atheism as well. But then I watch videos by these friars. I'm reminded there are kids who are still tortured with the propaganda that there's this thing called hell. I'll watch someone like Father Casey Cole, who seems to think like me, who seems like a left of center person. And then he's like, an abortion is obviously wrong. There's not even a debate. And I'm like, what? I think most people can think of situations where the concept of abortion is upsetting, but the idea that he has such a nuanced position just doesn't seem consistent with the kind of intellectual thinking he does in his other videos. I sometimes fantasize about making what I think is a slam dunk argument to Catholics on the question of abortion. So early in Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, the hero Jean Valjean has gotten out of prison. He served an absurdly long sentence for stealing a loaf of bread. He finds sanctuary in a cathedral, and still a desperate poor man, he tries to steal the cathedral's gold candles. By the way, I've only seen the movie, so I'm hoping the book goes the same way. But anyway, he's caught by the police, and when the bishop at the cathedral is told that this man has stolen from them, he says, no, don't worry about it. No theft here, nothing to see here. And the bishop is portraying in this scene the Catholic traditions of mercy and of concern for the poor. While that bishop may consider theft wrong, he understands that belief does not justify causing a poor man who committed a crime of desperation to suffer. The bishop decides incarceration, the cruel judgment of an unnuanced state, is a horrible thing. And I feel like what should be said to Catholics on abortion is, look, you believe in mercy. You believe that only God can judge. Even the most conservative videos, that one about is Judas in hell, the priest only says, probably, because only God can see what's in people's hearts, so it's not my place to judge them. So when Catholics advocate for being pro-life, they're not just saying they personally would not have abortion, they're saying that should be the law of the land, and implicitly that people who disagree with them should be incarcerated. You may not like abortion, but do you really want women and other people who can get abortions or doctors going to jail over this? When you could hear a very convincing argument why those people believe what they are doing is in the right, whether it's because it's so early in the pregnancy, the fetus is not at all conscious. And if you're not a vegan, you shouldn't be criticizing that act at all, or because it's later in the pregnancy, but, the fetus is going to die a horrible death no matter what, or the mother is not going to survive because it's an ectopic pregnancy. Even if you are against those things, can you seriously justify the state sending someone to jail over them? I mean, to me, that's a pretty solid argument why Catholics, even if they can say our members personally should not get abortions, why, in the big legal picture, they should be pro-choice. And to me, that's a logically sound argument. And when I hear the friars at their most logical, I would be convinced they would be open to that argument. But I guess the lesson of my exposure to these videos, and more broadly to the YouTube Catholic pipeline, is that there's this weird way in which people can be completely logic and open-minded, and suddenly when their dogma comes in, they become close-minded. You know, the way they talk about George Carlin or The Last Temptation of Christ is completely inconsistent with how they talk about light little SNL sketches on religion. Look, I hope there is room for dialogue because I like hearing perspectives from thinkers of all backgrounds. But I also know not to be naive. The people who believe they are divinely compelled to be close-minded reactionaries aren't going to change their minds anytime soon. But in the same time, I believe in pluralism. I believe in not being a snob. I believe in peaceful coexistence. So as unlikely as it seems that these people will change, I'm going to keep on hoping.